By definition, a storyteller conveys events in words, images, and sounds, often by improvisation or embellishment. The Living Bread Radio Network presents The Storytellers with Tony Agnesi. Today you'll hear a faith-based, inspirational story that's both heartfelt and heartwarming. And now, let's meet today's storyteller with Tony Agnesi.
Hi, this is Tony Agnesi, and welcome to this edition of The Storytellers. We're heard every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, with a repeat on Sundays at 9 a.m. here on the Living Bread Radio Network. The program is available as a podcast immediately following the interview at 2:30 at thestorytellersradio.com. It's also available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, TuneIn Radio, and now on Spotify. The program is sponsored in part by CatholicBook.net. All of the books featured on the program are available at CatholicBook.net, including our guest and my books as well. If you'd like to get more information on having me speak for your group, you can do so by just going to my website, TonyAgnesi.com. Well, today's guest is Dr. Phillip Kim. Dr. Kim is an associate professor at Walsh University in North Canton, Ohio. He is a consultant, a speaker, and has done a tremendous amount of business consulting and so forth. He's the author of a couple of books. The book we're going to zero in on today is called Chase One Rabbit, 10 Habits That Move You from Failure to Success. Dr. Phillip Kim is my guest. Phil, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Tony.
How does somebody get from where you were to here, to Walsh University here in North Canton?
Well, it is a bit of a long story. I'll try to condense this.
Sure.
But I was born and raised in West Philadelphia, just like the song says. And my parents emigrated from South Korea in the late 70s. And they settled in Philadelphia, of all places. So my sister and I were born there I was born in 77. So you can do the math on how old I am. So we settled there. They were the classic immigrant family, with not too many opportunities to do white-collar jobs. So they started different businesses in the inner city and sort of worked our way up. We eked out a low to middle class living, with my parents working 60, 70 plus hours a week. But the whole goal was to get their kids educated. So my sister and I were sort of the model. Well, my sister was actually the model child of immigrant parents who worked really hard. So she got straight A's, played the piano, all that jazz.
You not so much.
No, I was the total opposite of that. In fact, it was sort of a running joke that I was the black sheep of the family. So I mean, to be fair, I did pretty well up until about 10th grade, but then I go into this a little bit in the book, but my junior year was the first time I actually got an F on an exam, which to me, again, being Korean and having my sister be the straight A student, that was just a shock to me, and I even went back to the teacher and I said, "Are you sure you didn't grade this wrong?" She said, "No, Phil, you're really, you're bright, but you're pretty lazy, and you don't come to class often, and you don't do things like homework."
Sounds like my career. That sounds like my first 4 freshman years of college.
Right. No,
which I don't remember much of, but they said I had a great time.
That's funny. So actually, it ended up that I couldn't pass that class because it was a smaller high school. She was the only physics teacher in the whole course. And at that point, I think my name was marked, and there weren't many options for me. So I had to drop out of high school. So I never actually got my diploma. And it was during this time that this was before Google. So I had to look this up in the yellow pages, but I found out that there was a testing center that offered GEDs, so the general equivalency diploma. Again, I had no clue what this was, but I paid the $55 fee, and I went to the testing center, and it was so humbling because it was like it was single mothers, it was Army vets. I was the only kid there. And it was sort of just a cold splash of reality, like, what have I done with the opportunity that I was given? Here, my parents were working hard to the bone. My sister set this classic example, and here I'm a high school dropout. So there was now, to come on the other side of that, obviously we can sort of smile about it, but at the time it was a pretty catastrophic event in my life. But through God's grace, I was able to pass the GED. I forget what the passing score was, but I did okay on that. And thankfully, before my junior year, before this all went down, I actually had taken my SATs early. And in Eastern PA, actually Western PA too, Ohio's different. You guys have the ACT.
ACT.
Okay. But on the East Coast, it's the SAT. I did pretty well in the SAT. And prior to me dropping out of high school, I did okay in 9th and 10th grade. And based off of that and my essay, I actually got into a college. I don't know who was sleeping at the wheel, but I did get into a college. So moved out to Western PA, and then I got a job shortly after graduation. And this was around Y2K, where they were basically hiring anybody with a pulse, a pulse and a college degree, which I had both, thankfully. So I got hired there. And then after 10 years in the banking and audit industry, which I did okay at, I realized that wasn't my life's call. And I knew that I wanted to do something different. So that's when I went back to grad school. And then long story short, after I completed my doctorate, I started applying everywhere. Got an offer from Walsh. I'd never heard of Walsh before I applied. I didn't even know it existed. And then we moved out to Northeast Ohio about 2010, 9 years ago. So I'll be starting my 10th year this fall. So it's been a really circuitous route. But it's interesting because I always I start off the semester by asking my students, who here has a high school diploma? And they all raise their hands like, why is he asking this? Well, you've done something that I have not academically. So the message there is everybody gets a clean slate. I don't care what your performance was before this class. I don't care if your GPA is a 4.0 or a 1.7. Everybody gets a clean slate, and I'm going to judge you I'm going to assess you based off the performance that you based on your performance from going forward for this class. So,
Dr. Phil Kim is my guest. He is a associate professor at the DeVille School of Business, Walsh University. His book is entitled Chase One Rabbit. In the book, you talk a little bit about getting success from failure. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the. I think we have to reframe failure. I think even in our educational system right now, it's so geared towards, well, what is the answer? What's the answer to the test? And can we teach to the test? What are the assessments? What are the outcomes? And to a certain degree, I'm not saying those aren't important. Like, you have to learn how to do a thing. Like, if you go to your doctor or you go to your pharmacist, hopefully they've been skilled in a thing and they're certified and they're licensed to do whatever their job is entitling them to do. But bigger than that, I think our biggest learning lessons are from failure. I think our biggest learning happens when we don't know what the answer is and we have to figure it out. And we try a thing and then we fail. And we try a thing and then we fail again. And then once we get that skill is really hard earned and it's ingrained in us. And it's something that we're not likely to forget. As opposed to just memorizing facts and thinking, oh, what's the answer to this multiple choice question? No, I want you to know, can you apply this? And the only way to learn through application is to learn by experimenting and failing.
One of your examples in the book is WD40. I had never heard that example before. Share it with the audience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So this was by Dr. Larson, and he was working on basically working on a formula to displace water, the condensation from he was working with NASA to replace condensation on the ships that were being sent out to space because water and metal don't mix together. The oxidization of the metal leads to rust. So he and his team were working on this formula basically to displace the water. And I guess the point there is it's not called WD1. It's not called WD2. They took 39 failures to get to number 40. Yeah. So, 40. And you never know where that 40 is going to be. I mean, you never know where that next breakthrough is going to be. But if they would have given up at try number 39, I fix everything in my house with WD-40. Imagine where we'd be without it. That and duct tape. Forget about it.
WD-40, you're all set. The title "Chase One Rabbit." Where'd that come from?
Yeah, that's usually the question that I get. It's based off an old Confucian saying. Well, he's attributed with this, but the saying is, if you chase both rabbits, you catch neither. So often what I say is, it's not a matter of time management that you're not getting stuff done. It's a matter of choice management. Right?
Interesting.
So we all have the same 168 hours in a week, right? Mm-hmm. And yet you see people who are so much more productive, get so much more stuff done. And it's not like, I mean, to a degree, maybe they're sleeping less. But for the most part, they have normal sleep schedules. They still have a family life. They still have quote-unquote work-life balance. But they're able to focus in on the things that they want to get done as opposed to trying to do 8 different things all at once.
I find that some people put together their to-do list for the day, and there's 50 things on there, and they get nothing done. You talk about zeroing in on the on the most important.
That's
thing.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's the Jack Welch method of the GE method of basically prioritizing. And I say this in the book too, that this isn't necessarily groundbreaking. No. It's not like, but neither is losing weight. I mean, people know how to lose weight, but it's the actual application of it. And I should know that. But so what I say is I think what I share is the GE method of prioritizing your top 3 things for that day, right? So don't move on to number 2 until you get number 1 done. So that's one method.
What's our natural tendency, though? Do what's easy, or do what's I like, or do what's fun, or
that's a good question, and I think there are some time management gurus out there that would say, okay, start with the low-hanging fruit, get that out of the way. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. My point is, if you don't prioritize, then that's what you're going to default to. What is the easiest? What is the quickest thing? And there's a book by Brian Tracy called Eat That Frog or Swallow the Frog. But basically his point is, do the hardest thing first, and then the rest of the stuff will seem so much easier. It's almost like a reward. Like, do the exercise or do the things that you dread doing first, and then the rest of the day is sort of just a treat.
You mentioned something that I talk about a lot, and that's chunking, where you've got this, I always use the phrase, how do you eat an elephant? That's right. One spoonful at a time.
That's
or
right.
And how do you chunk? You talk a little bit about chunking. When somebody says, I've got a task to perform, Doctor, and it's just so overwhelming. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. That is, I think that is definitely one of the keys to quote unquote success. That's one of the keys to productivity for sure. Any big project that takes longer than several hours worth of work, and I'd even say, I don't want to get down to minutes, because there's a book called Getting Things Done by Dave Allen. And I love this. He says, if it takes less than 2 minutes, then just do it. So if it's an email that you need to respond to say yes or no, don't hold off on it, because that's just adding sort of to your decision fatigue, this idea that if you have so many decisions to make, it just exhausts you mentally. So if it's under 2 minutes, by all means, just get it out of the way. You'll feel better for it. But the bigger projects, the things that take days, hours, weeks, what have you, the key there is to, again, prioritize what you need to do, break it up into smaller chunks, and knock out one chunk. That's it. If you can knock out that one chunk, the rest of your day, you can move on to something else, or you can prepare for tomorrow. But what it does is mentally, it gets you in the mode of, I need to expend resources and energy and creativity to get this done. There's, I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, but Albert Einstein has been known to solve problems. This is sort of tangentially related, but solve problems by walking away from them. So what chunking does is it forces you to focus on a single task or single series of tasks to get a part of that project done, and then walk away from it. And what Einstein would do is he'd have trouble with a math problem. He'd be working on it all day, and then he'd stop, and then he'd practice violin, or he'd take a walk, and there would be the solution right there. So I think chunking forces you to do a thing for a certain period of time and then walk away from it and come back to it.
And I found that to be really true for me, writing, I've got 2 books out, and I have a third book that I need to chunk. But, the idea that, you don't do anything for a month, and then all of a sudden you try to get it all done in in a day, and that just doesn't work.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the idea, I think you talk about the 15-minute writing thing or something in the book, and it just, if you do that every day, then
Right.
you're really putting it into bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that also. It reminds me of my students who try to cram everything, a semester's worth of material into one, caffeine-infused cram session the night before the exam. And what happens is you're exhausted. I mean, you barely know the material because it's all surface level anyway at that point. Whereas if, to your point, again, thank you for the reminder, if you were to chunk that out even 3 to 4 weeks before the exam or before the due date, whatever your project is, you're going to have to reverse engineer that. What's the due date? And then work backwards. If you could chunk that into 15, 20, 35-minute intervals, then research shows that over time, repetition is what increases knowledge retention. So if you are able to repetitively go through that motion, that's going to increase the retention of the knowledge, not just surface area.
Philip, behind my desk, I have a 3x5 card. It's been there for 40 years that says, "That was yesterday." I got that from a friend of mine who I shared an office with 40 years ago. He was a bad alcoholic, and he finally came to a realization, and we shared this bulletin board, and we put that card up. That was yesterday. He's since passed away, but I've kept that card with me. Talk about the dwelling that we do on, and why that's not going to be very productive for us in trying to move to success from failure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a great quote. That was yesterday. I am convinced that one of the biggest detriments of students not doing well is their own limiting beliefs. So whether it's, hey, I am not a good writer or I'm not good at math. I mean, if you were to poll students who here is good at math, none of them would say anything, right? I mean, it's like it's asking them who here is creative or who here is an artist. I think it was Tony Robinson had said this, but Ken Robinson, he had said, if you were to poll kindergartners, how creative are you, or who here thinks that they're creative, almost all the hands would go up. Yeah, and then the older you get, less and less hands go. It's not that those children or adults are any less creative. It's the fact that they don't believe that they are, or they haven't been given opportunities to be creative. And I think that's definitely true of failure. I think too often we as a society and individually, we're much more likely to see the negative, our failures, things that we fall short on. Often in my seminars, I'll talk about, if I were to ask everyone to name 10 things that they like about themselves, 10 positive traits. And surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, it's often women more than men that have trouble with this. But people in general have trouble coming up with 5 things. Now, if I were to ask that same audience, okay, I want you to list 3 things that you'd like to change about yourself, there's a list of 20, right? Yeah. So we call that the negativity bias. So we are much more likely to remember negative events in our lives, and we are much more likely to lean towards where we are short, where we have a deficit. And I love that. That was yesterday. I think that's so true. We are humans. We are fallible. We make mistakes all the time. And if we continually live in yesterday, then it becomes so much more difficult to actually believe that we can accomplish a thing. Think about, and I hate to use myself as an example, but so for me, high school dropout, horrible at science. I was a really poor writer. My writing was atrocious. So to go to grad school and to finish a dissertation and to write books, that's a lot of writing, right? I mean, it's a lot of, and you know this, writing 3 books. But if in the back of your mind is, oh, I'm a horrible writer, there's no way you're going to have any confidence or any joy or any willingness to put in the effort to do it, as opposed to, well, that was yesterday. Today's a new day. I love that.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I have always been a speaker and a storyteller and so forth, and people have always asked me to write the stories down. And when I went into my freshman year of college, the first paper I turned into an English class came back with more red ink than black ink, great big F at the top. And the professor said, "You'll never write above a 5th grade level."
Wow.
And that really had a profound effect on me. I used that as an excuse for years not to write. So finally I started writing. I wrote a bunch of short stories, gave them to a college professor, retired college professor friend of mine. "Read these, see what you think." And she said, "Oh, they're fabulous stories."
Cool.
I said, "What level do I write at?" She goes, "About 6th grade." So in 40 years, Phil, I'm up a grade. So, but it's the difference between taking the failure as an excuse and not starting with a new day, saying, "Well, that was yesterday."
That's right.
And this is a new day. We tend to. There's a book, Mastering Success, Dr. John Glass, old book, probably 30 years old. He said there's 3 kinds of people. There are idea people, there are doers, and there are historians. Idea people have a million ideas but can't get anything done. That I would put myself into that category.
I think I'm in there too.
And then there are doers that never had an original idea in their life, but give them something, they can get it done.
Okay.
And when you hire people, if you're an idea person like we are, when you hire a secretary, you ought to get a doer, right?
Yeah.
But what do we tend to hire? People like us. So we sit around with a million great ideas, don't get anything done. And then that third group is what I want to zero in on, the historians. They don't have any great ideas. They can't get anything done, but they can sure tell you everything that you didn't get done. They're that complainer that is always complaining. So they're not fixers, they're complainers. You've got a chapter on that. Help us with that.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. So, and I'm trying to remember what the exact phrase was, but basically that complaining makes us fat, which is kind of funny to think about. I think again, I'm recalling here. So what happens is when you complain, when you have a negative attitude, that is a indicator. Well, actually, one is a precursor to the other, but increased stress. So when you have a negative attitude, it increases the stress, the level of cortisol in your body. And what's surprising about that is here it's a mental exercise, right? These negative sort of I'm down feelings, but that increases the level of hormones in your body, the cortisol level, which leads to apathy, which leads to lethargy, which leads to sitting around and getting fat.
And you get fat.
So I say complaining makes you fat. Yeah, I mean, the point there is, what good does complaining do? Honestly, what good does it do? There may be some mental payoff whenever you're able to vent. I'm not talking about that. Every once in a while you have that, and you sort of need that, because if you bottle it all in, you become this, George Costanza Serenity Now moment, But you got to have trusted people where you can express some dissatisfaction. But at the end of the day, if you are known as someone who is an energy sucker,
right out of the room.
Right. And it's probably because you complain. And, complaining ultimately does nothing good, and in fact can make you physically ill, which is kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, don't complain. Do something about it.
Dr. Phillip Kim is my guest. The book we're discussing is Chase One Rabbit, 10 Habits That Move You from Failure to Success. I've been using this quote for years, and I can't attribute it to anything, but you talk a little bit about this in the book. Maybe you can expand a little bit. And the quote is, "The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing."
Yeah.
And you talk a little bit about the main thing in the book. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think a bunch of people have used this quote. More recently, I want to say there's a preacher. His name is T.D. Jakes, and he sort of has that on a placard with his name on it. But the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What I say there is, again, when you are trying to get a thing done, when you are trying to get paper done, when you're trying to get a new job, when you're trying to save up. Right now, we're in the process of. My wife and I joke, it's either the kids get braces or we get to take them to Universal. So next summer we're saving up to take them up to Universal. Their teeth will be crooked, but they'll have a fun time. But the main thing is keep the main thing. So in that essence, you kind of have to make some decisions, right? So when you're saving up for a thing, or if you're trying to create a new life for yourself, or trying to start a new business, or trying to, for those of your listeners, if they followed you, I'm sure you've encouraged them to write a book as well, or just tell their story, right? Mm-hmm. So if your goal is to do that, you really almost, to a degree, you have to put on some blinders at times and get that thing done. Mm-hmm. So chunk your big project into smaller chunks. And if you keep in mind that the main thing for you for this season in your life is to finish that book, then do that, right? I mean, not to oversimplify it, but whatever that main thing is, everything else should come secondary to that main thing. Now, hopefully, for most of us, that main thing is a big thing. I mean, it's not, if you treat everything like the main thing, then nothing is the main thing, right? So, and another thing is, we talk about this, I talked about decision fatigue. You know, if everything is of primary and utmost importance, then your life becomes unmanageable as well. So you kind of have to do a risk assessment in terms of, okay, realistically, what can I get done in the next, what is this now? It's May. In the next 7 months, before the year is up, what can I get done? And if that is truly a worthwhile goal, worth your time, and you're going to pursue and put forth energy to complete it, then do it. By all means, do it.
Mm-hmm. There's these things that aren't important but have some immediacy to them. Things like email, you know, or even worse is a text message. I have people that'll text message me, and if you don't respond within 30 seconds, so
right.
You could be concentrating on the main thing, Phil, but then there's always these urgencies. They're not your urgency, by the way, but they're urgencies. How do you push those aside?
That's a tough one, Tony. I would say, and this, you know, I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else listening, but I would definitely adhere to the idea of disconnecting. Absolutely. I mean, social media, our phones, our texts, our emails, what have you, they are such a time suck. And I forget who had said this, but I believe this. For every minute that you are deterred from your task, it takes you 20 minutes to get back into it. Yeah. So imagine you are half an hour into your writing chapter 3 or whatever this is, or filling out that TPS report. You are taken away by 3 different emails, and you reply to all of those. Now, this goes in direct contrast to what Dave Allen said about if it takes under 2 minutes, just do it. But I think we all need focused, uninterrupted time to get things done. So I think that is definitely and absolutely true. So disconnect, and you kind of have to be comfortable with being a jerk. I mean, I hate to say it, but
I know what you mean.
You kind of have to be comfortable with people thinking that you're a jerk for not getting back to them. And to be honest, if you don't reply back, the world still...
It still turns.
Yeah, it still turns, right? Nobody died.
Well, this has been a wonderful time. It's gone by way too quickly, and I really have enjoyed our time together. Dr. Phillip Kim from Walsh University's DeVille School of Business. He's an associate professor there, and his book is entitled Chase One Rabbit, 10 Habits That Move You from Failure to Success. And Phil, it's been a pleasure having you with us.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like we could do this all day.
Much. And that's our show for today. This is Tony Agnesi. We'll see you again next week for another edition of The Storytellers.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Storytellers with Tony Agnesi, a production of the Living Bread Radio Network in Canton, Ohio. To learn more about today's storyteller, go to thestorytellersradio.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast and hear all of our past shows. And join us again next week at this same time for The Storytellers with Tony Agnesi.